The white dress felt like a shroud. Celine's fingers traced the delicate embroidery her mother had stitched along the hem. Tiny silver wolves chasing each other in an endless circle. Her mother had spent the last month of her life creating this dress, her hands shaking from the illness that would eventually take her, insisting that her daughter would need something beautiful for her mating ceremony. For when Demon finally makes it official, her mother had whispered, her eyes bright with fever and hope, "You deserve to look like the treasure you are." That was 3 years ago. 3 years of Celine keeping the dress wrapped in linen, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, finally, Demon had told her to wear it. Tonight was supposed to be their public bonding declaration in front of the entire Meadowbrook pack. Instead, standing in her small room at the edge of the pack house, the room that was really just a converted storage space because the Alpha's legitimate children got the real bedrooms, Celine felt a creeping sense of dread she couldn't quite name. She picked up the small velvet box from her dresser. Inside was the ancestral ring, passed down through her mother's line for 6 generations. It wasn't much, a simple silver band with a small moonstone, but it was all she had left of her mother's family. Tradition said she would give it to Demon during the ceremony, and he would place it on her finger as a symbol of their bond. Her wolf, usually quiet and timid, stirred restlessly. "Something's wrong," it seemed to whisper. "Run." "Don't be ridiculous," Celine told herself firmly, closing her fingers around the box. "You're just nervous. Demon loves you. He's loved you since you were 15. A sharp knock made her jump. Kasia stood in the doorway, resplendent in a crimson dress that perfectly complemented her golden hair and honey-colored eyes. Her half-sister's lips curved in what might have been a smile if it had reached her eyes. "Still planning to go through with it?" Kasia asked, her tone conversational but with an edge Celine couldn't quite identify. "The ceremony, I mean." "Of course," Celine said, confused. "Why wouldn't I?" Kasia examined her perfectly manicured nails. "Oh, no reason. Just making sure you're ready for everything tonight has to offer." She looked up, and for just a moment, Celine saw something triumphant flash in her eyes. "You should probably head down. The drums are about to start, and you know how Father hates when ceremonies run late." "Father." Kasia always said it so naturally, so possessively, as if their shared parent belonged only to her. Alpha Marcus had acknowledged Celine as his daughter. He'd had to, pack law demanded it, but he'd never been a father to her. She was the embarrassing proof of his brief affair with a pack healer, tolerated but never truly accepted. Celine made her way down the narrow servants' stairs. She wasn't allowed to use the main staircase, and out toward the ceremonial grounds. The massive bonfire was already roaring, its flames reaching toward the dark sky like grasping fingers. 300 wolves from the Meadowbrook pack had gathered in a circle around it, their faces painted gold by the firelight. She spotted Demon standing at the center of the circle, and her heart did its familiar flutter. He was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, all lean muscle and sharp features, with auburn hair that fell into his hazel eyes. He was a beta, third in command of the pack, and everyone said he was destined for greater things. And he'd chosen her. Plain, quiet Celine, the Alpha's bastard daughter. He'd chosen her. So why wasn't he looking at her? Demon's eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone. When his gaze finally landed on her, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Pity. He was looking at her with pity. The pack drums began their rhythmic beating, deep and primal, calling everyone to attention. This was it. This was the moment Celine had dreamed about for 7 years. She clutched the velvet box tighter and started walking toward the center of the circle, toward Demon, toward her future. But then Kasia appeared beside Demon. Not near him, not in the crowd. Beside him, where Celine should be standing. The drums stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that Celine could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Demon said, his voice carrying across the gathered wolves. His tone was formal, ceremonial, nothing like the soft voice he used when they were alone. "I've called this gathering to make an important announcement about my future." Celine's feet kept moving forward, even though every instinct was screaming at her to stop. to run, to disappear before whatever was about to happen could destroy her. As beta of this pack, I have responsibilities, Demon continued. Responsibilities to help lead, to strengthen our position among the Northern Territories, to form alliances that benefit us all. And I've realized that to fulfill those responsibilities, I need the right mate. He still wasn't looking at her. Everyone else was. She could feel their eyes on her like physical touches, see the dawning understanding and barely concealed glee on some faces. The pack loved nothing more than drama, and they could smell it coming like blood in the water. Finally, Demon's eyes met hers. "Celine," he said, and his voice almost sounded kind. That somehow made it worse. "You've been a part of my life for a long time. You're sweet. You've been a good companion when I needed one." The words landed like blows. Sweet, companion, past tense, all past tense. "But I've had to think about what I need going forward," Demon said, and now he reached for Kasha's hand. Kasha, who was smiling with sharp-edged triumph. "I need a mate who can help me rise in the ranks. Someone with the bloodline, the connections, the strength to stand beside me as I reach my full potential." No. The words screamed through Celine's mind, but her voice had abandoned her. She stood frozen, watching her world end frame by frame, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "That's why I'm choosing Kasha as my mate," Demon announced, his voice ringing with finality. "She's Alpha Marcus's true daughter. She has the training, the status, and the presence that will help me become the leader I'm meant to be." The crowd erupted. Some gasped in shock, though Celine suspected most of them had known this was coming. Others whispered excitedly, already spreading the gossip. A few, very few, looked at her with genuine sympathy. But most just watched, hungry for her reaction, for the spectacle of her public humiliation. This was a rejection, public rejection. The most shameful thing that could happen to a wolf, worse even than being challenged and defeated in combat. At least in combat you fought back. This was being discarded like trash in front of everyone you'd ever known. Kasha stepped forward, and her voice carried with practiced clarity. "I hope you understand, Celine. Some wolves are just born for greater things. Demon needs a real partner, someone with actual value to offer. Not," she gestured vaguely at Celine, her lip curling, "not a charity case." The velvet box slipped from Celine's numb fingers. It hit the ground with a soft thud that somehow felt louder than the drums had been. The lid popped open, and her mother's ring rolled out, glinting in the firelight before settling in the dirt. Like everything else in her life, it ended up in the dirt. Tears burned hot trails down Celine's face. She couldn't even find the strength to run, to preserve whatever tiny shred of dignity she might have left. She just stood there, frozen in her dead mother's dress, while 300 wolves stared and whispered and judged. "Someone should take her inside," she heard someone mutter. "This is pathetic. Poor thing. She actually thought a beta would stay with the alpha's bastard. Kasha's been planning this for months. Everyone knew except her." The words swirled around her like poison, each one finding its mark. Her wolf had retreated so far inside that Celine couldn't feel it anymore. Maybe it had finally given up on her too. She should move, should say something, should do anything except stand here like a broken doll while her entire life collapsed around her. But she couldn't. She was paralyzed by the sheer enormity of the betrayal. 7 years. 7 years of promises and plans and stolen moments. 7 years of believing she was loved despite being unwanted by everyone else. And it had all been a lie, ended in the time it took Demon to say a few carefully chosen words. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first, a pressure like the feeling before a lightning strike. The wolves closest to the edge of the circle suddenly tensed, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the tree line, noses lifting to scent the wind. Someone powerful was approaching, very powerful. Through her tear-blurred vision, Celine saw him emerge from the darkness between the trees. The crowd parted instantly, instinctively, wolves scrambling to get out of his way. Alpha King Theron Blackwater. Celine had never seen him before, few had, But there was no mistaking who he was. He ruled the entire Northern Territories, commanded 10 packs including Meadowbrook, and was a legend even among alphas. He'd united the fractured territories through a combination of brutal efficiency and strategic brilliance. And he'd done it all alone, without a Luna, without even seeming to want one. He was massive, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block out the firelight. His black hair fell past his shoulders, some of it braided away from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. All sharp angles and harsh lines, with a jaw that could cut glass and a mouth set in a perpetual expression of controlled displeasure. But it was his eyes that truly captured attention. Storm gray with silver flecks that seemed to glow in the firelight, ancient and knowing and absolutely merciless. He wore black leather and dark furs, clothes made for function rather than ceremony. But the authority radiating from him made any formal robes unnecessary. Every wolf in the clearing, including Alpha Marcus, instinctively lowered their gaze. You didn't look directly at an alpha king unless invited. It was primal, coded into their very DNA. But Theron wasn't looking at Marcus or Demon or even Kasha. His storm gray eyes, glowing with barely contained power, were fixed on Selene. The weight of his attention was like being pinned by a physical force. Selene's breath caught in her throat. She should lower her gaze too, should submit to the overwhelming dominance rolling off him in waves. But she couldn't look away. Those silver-flecked eyes held her captive, and something about them, something fierce and possessive and utterly unexpected, made her wolf suddenly surge forward for the first time in her life. Mine, her wolf whispered, the word reverberating through every cell in her body. Mine. Theron crossed the circle with predatory grace, his boots making no sound on the packed earth. The crowd pressed back further, desperate to get out of his way. Demon and Kasha, who moments ago had been the center of attention, were suddenly irrelevant, forgotten, as the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories walked past them without a glance. He stopped directly in front of Selene. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. Heat and power and barely leashed violence wrapped in skin. The scent of him washed over her. Pine forests, winter frost, and something wild and primal that made her knees weak. Your name, he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd expected. Deep as distant thunder, rough like gravel, commanding in a way that made disobedience seem physically impossible. Selene, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Selene Ashwood. Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Ashwood, the healer line. It wasn't a question. Somehow he knew. Look at me properly. She realized she'd finally dropped her gaze, instinct overcoming shock. Slowly, she raised her eyes back to his, and the impact of that direct contact nearly buckled her knees. Power, ancient and absolute, crashed against her. But underneath it, she felt something else. Recognition, like his soul had just identified hers. Theron's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared slightly as he scented the air around her. The salt of her tears, the bitter tang of her humiliation. When his eyes cut to Demon and Kasha, still standing in the center of the circle, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. You, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Beta, what's your name? Demon paled but managed to straighten his spine. Demon Clearwater, Your Majesty. I'm the Beta of... I didn't ask for your resume. I asked for your name. Theron's voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Why is that woman crying? Your Majesty, this is simply a pack matter. Alpha Marcus interjected, stepping forward with a placating smile that looked more like a grimace. A minor disagreement about mate choices. Nothing that requires your personal attention. I'm not talking to you. Theron didn't even look at Marcus. His eyes remained fixed on Demon. Answer the question. Why is she crying? Demon swallowed hard. Selene could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. I chose a different mate, Your Majesty. I chose Kasha instead of Selene. It's my right to choose who I want to bond with, after promising her first. Again, not a question. Somehow Theron knew. Could he sense it? Read it in the devastation on her face? After making her believe you were hers. After letting her stand here in front of 300 witnesses, holding a ring meant for you, while you publicly chose someone else. Each word was delivered like a judge reading out crimes. Demon's face went from pale to gray. It's politics, Your Majesty, Demon stammered. I need a mate who can help me advance. Celine is the Alpha's bastard, Theron supplied, his voice deadly quiet. Is that what you were going to say? That she's not good enough because her mother was a healer and not a Luna? I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Theron finally looked away from Demon, dismissing him entirely, and turned back to Celine. His expression softened fractionally, from granite to merely stone. Did he promise you forever? The question was so unexpected, so gentle despite the rough voice, that fresh tears spilled down Celine's cheeks. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Did he make you believe you were chosen? That you mattered? Another nod. Her throat was too tight to speak. And did he take it all away in front of everyone who's ever made you feel like you weren't enough? That broke her. A sob tore from her throat, raw and ugly and honest. Yes, she whispered. Yes, he made me a joke. Theron's eyes flashed with something primal and furious. When he turned to face the crowd, his voice carried with the absolute authority of someone who'd commanded armies and crushed rebellions. This woman has been publicly dishonored, humiliated by wolves who lack the basic decency to reject her in private, betrayed by someone she trusted. His gaze swept across every face in the circle, and Celine saw wolves, even the strongest warriors, flinch away from that stare. As Alpha King of the Northern Territories, I invoke the law of claiming. The crowd's collective gasp was like a physical wave. The law of claiming. Celine knew it from the old stories her mother used to tell, but she'd never heard of it being actually used. It was ancient, from the days when packs were smaller and justice was simpler. Any unmated alpha may claim an omega who has been wrongfully rejected or cast aside. Theron continued, his voice ringing with formal authority. The claim supersedes all previous bonds or promises. Cannot be challenged except through trial by combat. He was claiming her. The Alpha King was claiming her. But why? He didn't know her. Didn't know her anything. Why would the most powerful wolf in the territories, a king who'd never shown interest in any omega despite hundreds throwing themselves at him, claim someone like her? Cash's stunned expression had transformed into something ugly. Your Majesty, you can't be serious. She's nobody, just the healer's bastard. She has no status, no connections. No. No what? Theron's voice cracked like a whip. No value? Is that what you were going to say? He took a step toward Kasha, and even though Celine was standing right beside him, even she felt the overwhelming wave of dominance that rolled off him. You're the Alpha's legitimate daughter. Tell me, do you know the properties of wolfsbane? Can you identify the 37 medicinal herbs that grow in these territories? Could you stitch a wound that would kill a wolf in minutes if left untreated? Kasha's mouth opened and closed uselessly. No, Theron answered for her. But her mother could. The healer you dismiss so casually. The woman whose line has kept wolves alive in these territories for 6 generations. He looked at Demon. And you chose status over substance. You chose ambition over loyalty. You proved you're exactly the kind of weak, short-sighted wolf who will never rise above beta, no matter who you mate. The insult landed like a physical blow. Demon actually staggered back a step, his face flushing with humiliation. Kasha looked ready to cry with rage, but Theron had already dismissed them. He pulled something from inside his leather coat, a black velvet box embossed with a silver wolf's head, the royal seal of the Blackwater line. When he opened it, even in the firelight, Celine could see that what lay inside was extraordinary. The ring was white gold, delicate despite its obvious strength, wrapped around a stone unlike anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't quite silver, wasn't quite white, but seemed to contain actual moonlight, glowing with an ethereal luminescence that had nothing to do with the fire. This is the Blackwater lunar ring, Theron said, his voice softer now. meant just for her despite the hundreds of listening ears. It's been in my family for 12 generations. Every Alpha King has waited to give it to the one wolf worthy of standing beside him as Luna Queen. He pulled the ring from the box, and Celine saw that the band was inscribed with words in the old language. She couldn't read them, but she could feel the power radiating from the metal old magic, the kind that bound souls together across lifetimes. I've been Alpha King for 10 years, Theron continued. His storm-gray eyes locked on hers. In that time, I've met thousands of Omegas. Beautiful ones, powerful ones, ones with impressive bloodlines and political connections. I've been courted by Alphas offering their daughters, propositioned by wolves who'd do anything for the title of Luna Queen. He paused, and something that might have been vulnerability flickered across his harsh features. None of them ever made my wolf wake up. Not once in 10 years did it stir. Did it see anyone worth claiming? He knelt before her. The Alpha King knelt in the dirt of the Meadowbrook Pack ceremonial grounds, in front of 300 witnesses, and held out the ring that queens had worn for 12 generations. Until tonight, he said, his voice rough with an emotion Celine couldn't quite name. Until I saw you crying in your mother's dress, holding a ring meant for a fool who didn't deserve you. My wolf woke up for the first time in a decade, and it won't rest until you're safe. Until you're mine. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break free. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of dream or delusion brought on by grief and humiliation. But I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? You don't even know me. I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer you. I can't help you politically. I can't. Stop. The command in his voice made her mouth snap shut. You've been told you're nobody for so long you believe it. But you're wrong. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. The touch sent electricity racing down her spine. You want to know what I see when I look at you? She nodded, unable to speak. I see a wolf who wore her dead mother's dress because it was the only thing of value she had left. I see someone who held on to hope despite having every reason to give up. I see a healer's daughter who knows things that could save lives, standing in a pack that treats healers like servants. His voice dropped lower, more intense. I see someone who's been underestimated and undervalued her entire life. And I see my mate. The word hung in the air between them. Mate, not a political alliance or a convenient pairing. Mate, the bond the moon goddess herself created, the joining of souls that transcended reason or logic. I'm offering you a choice, Theron said, and despite the command in his voice, she believed him. You can say no. You can walk away from all of this. From me, from the title, from everything. I won't force you. But if you say yes, if you take this ring, you become my Luna Queen. Not my property, not my trophy, my partner, my equal. And I swear on my title, on my honor, on the graves of every Blackwater who came before me, no one will ever make you feel worthless again. Celine looked at the ring glowing in his palm. Then at Demon, who was staring at her with something that might have been regret but looked more like anger. At Kasha, whose face was twisted with jealous rage. At Alpha Marcus, whose expression was complicated. He'd just realized the bastard daughter he'd barely acknowledged was about to become the most powerful Luna in the Northern Territories. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a story she'd told Celine when she was young. The moon goddess sometimes breaks your heart to clear the way for your destiny. Trust in that, little one. Trust that sometimes the worst pain leads to the greatest purpose. Celine took the ring from Theron's palm. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. Yes, I'll be your Luna Queen. The moment the ring slipped onto her finger, power flooded through her. His power, vast and ancient and overwhelming. The mate bond snapped into place with such force that Celine gasped. It was like lightning striking her chest, spreading through her veins in waves of heat and recognition. She could feel him now, feel his fierce protectiveness, his iron control barely containing the primal need to claim and defend. And underneath all that power and authority, she felt his loneliness. A vast, aching emptiness that had existed for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be alone. Until now. Theron stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and turned to face the stunned crowd. His arm wrapped around her waist, solid and possessive, and she leaned into his strength because her legs were shaking too badly to hold her up alone. "Anyone who disrespects my Luna answers to me personally," Theron announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. His eyes found Alpha Marcus. "That includes her father, who should have protected her but didn't. It includes pack members who treated her like she was less because of her birth." His gaze cut to Demon and Kasha. "And it especially includes the wolves who thought themselves above her. You proved tonight that you have neither honor nor wisdom. Remember that the next time you wonder why you'll never rise higher than you are right now." He looked down at Celine, his expression softening. "We're leaving. Now. You don't belong in a place that couldn't see your worth." "My things," Celine managed. "I don't have much, but whatever you need, you'll have." Theron's voice was firm. "Better than what you had. Whatever was in that room isn't worth keeping." He was right. The tiny converted storage room, the hand-me-down clothes, the few possessions she'd accumulated. None of it mattered. None of it was truly hers. It was all just evidence of how little her pack had valued her. As Theron began leading her toward the edge of the clearing, toward the black carriage bearing the royal crest that waited in the shadows, Kasha's anguished shriek cut through the night. "This isn't fair. She doesn't deserve this. She's nothing." Theron paused. For a moment, Celine thought he might ignore it. But then he turned, and the look he gave Kasha was colder than winter frost. "She is everything you'll never be," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "She has genuine strength, the kind that comes from surviving in a place determined to break her. You have status handed to you by birth and cruelty masquerading as confidence. I know which one builds a queen." He guided Celine toward the carriage. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting already. The pack would talk about this for years, the night the Alpha's bastard daughter caught the eye of the Alpha King. As they reached the carriage, Theron handed her up into the plush interior. It smelled like leather and pine and him. Before climbing in himself, he turned back one last time. "Demon Clearwater," he called out, his voice ringing across the ceremonial grounds. "You asked earlier about your potential for advancement. Let me clarify something. You will never rise above Beta. Not in this pack, not in any pack under my rule. Because I've seen what you value, and it tells me everything I need to know about your character. Or lack thereof." Then he was inside the carriage, settling beside Celine with a grace that shouldn't be possible for someone so large. The door closed, muffling the chaos outside. The driver must have been waiting for his signal because the carriage immediately lurched into motion. Celine sat in stunned silence as they pulled away from the only home she'd ever known. Away from the pack that had tolerated but never accepted her. Away from the life she'd planned, the future she'd imagined. Toward something completely unknown. She looked down at the ring on her finger. The moonstone glowed softly in the darkness of the carriage, and she could feel the power in it. Old magic, binding magic. This wasn't just a symbol. It was a promise, a bond, a future written in moonlight and ancient oaths. "Breathe," Theron said quietly. His hand found hers, warm and solid, anchoring her. "You're safe now." Safe. What a strange concept. She'd spent her whole life not being safe. Not from her sister's cruelty, not from her pack's judgment, not from Demon's betrayal. Safety felt foreign, uncomfortable even. "I don't understand," Celine whispered. "Why me? Really? There has to be a reason beyond." "Beyond fate," Theron asked. "Beyond the mate bond that I can feel burning in my chest right now? Beyond the fact that my wolf, which has been silent and dead for 10 years, woke up the moment it sensed your pain." He shifted to face her more fully in the darkness. She could see his eyes glowing faintly, the wolf close to the surface. "10 years ago, I made a decision," he said, his voice low and rough. "I decided I didn't need a mate, didn't want one, because everyone I'd seen choose mates had chosen wrong. Picked based on status or beauty or political advantage. I watched wolves mate for every reason except the right one. So I decided I'd rule alone. that I'd be stronger without that weakness. And now, Celine asked, now I know I was wrong. His hand tightened on hers. Because from the moment I saw you standing there, crying in your mother's dress while that bastard chose someone else, I couldn't breathe until I'd claimed you. 10 years of control, of denying my wolf, of believing I was better off alone. All of it shattered in a single heartbeat. That's terrifying, Celine said honestly. A hint of a smile ghosted across his harsh features. For both of us. I don't know you yet, Celine. And you don't know me. We're gonna have to figure this out as we go. How to be mates, how to rule together, how to build something real out of a bond we didn't choose but can't deny. The carriage rattled along the forest road. Outside, wolves howled. Probably border patrols noting the Alpha King's passage through their territory. The sound should have been ominous, but instead, it felt like an escort. A recognition of what she'd become. What happens now? Celine asked, voicing the question that had been building since she'd slipped on the ring. Where are we going? Midnight Keep, Theron said. My fortress. Your new home. He paused. It's not going to be easy, Celine. The court will question you. Other packs will test you. There are wolves who've been angling to become my Luna for years, and they won't take kindly to an unknown Omega from a small pack taking that position. So I'm walking into another group of wolves who think I'm not good enough, Celine said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice and failing. No, Theron corrected firmly. You're walking into a group of wolves who will learn very quickly what happens when they disrespect my mate. There's a difference. The certainty in his voice sent a thrill through her. She'd spent her whole life being the one everyone disrespected. The idea of having someone powerful enough to make them stop, to make them pay, was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I'm going to disappoint you, Celine blurted out. I don't know how to be a Luna Queen. I don't know politics or strategy or how to rule. I'm just a healer's daughter who can barely command respect in her own pack. Stop. Theron's command cut through her spiral. You're doing it again, believing what they told you about yourself. Yes, you'll make mistakes. So will I. We'll figure it out together. His thumb stroked across the back of her hand. But Celine, the fact that you're worried about being good enough tells me you're already better than half the alphas I've met who think their bloodline alone makes them qualified to lead. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, Celine caught her first glimpse of Midnight Keep, and her breath caught. It rose from the forest like something from a legend. A massive fortress of black stone and dark towers, built into the side of a mountain. Moonlight gleamed off walls that had stood for centuries, and torches burned in what seemed like hundreds of windows. It was beautiful and forbidding and absolutely overwhelming. Home, Theron said quietly, watching her face. Our home now. The carriage stopped in a massive courtyard. Before Celine could even reach for the door handle, it swung open, and Theron was there, offering his hand to help her down. The moment her feet touched the stone, she felt it, power thrumming through the very ground, ancient and vast. Wolves had emerged from the keep, guards, servants, officials, all bowing low as their king approached. But Celine could feel their eyes on her, curious and assessing and, in some cases, hostile. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had their king suddenly claimed a mate after 10 years of ruling alone? A woman stepped forward, older than the others, with silver streaking through her black hair. She wore the robes of a high-ranking official, and her sharp eyes took in everything about Celine in a single sweeping glance. Your Majesty, she said, bowing to Theron. Then, with slightly less depth, to Celine. My Lady Luna. Alara, Theron acknowledged. This is Celine, my mate and your Luna Queen. She'll need chambers prepared, a full wardrobe, and a schedule of meetings with the relevant officials. Tomorrow. Of course, Your Majesty. Alara's expression was neutral, professionally courteous, but Celine could sense the calculation behind it. Should I summon the Pack Council to formally announce? Tomorrow, Theron repeated, his voice brooking no argument. Tonight, my mate needs rest and peace, not politics. He kept his hand on the small of Celine's back as he guided her into the keep. The inside was even more overwhelming than the outside. Soaring ceilings, intricate tapestries depicting ancient battles, floors of polished stone that gleamed like mirrors. It was beautiful and intimidating and completely alien to everything she'd known. They climbed a spiraling staircase that seemed to go on forever. Finally, Theron stopped at a massive set of double doors carved with wolves running through forests. "These will be your chambers," he said, pushing them open. "For now. Eventually, when you're ready, if you're ready, you'll share mine. But I won't rush you, Celine. We have time." The rooms beyond were stunning, easily 10 times the size of her storage room back at Meadowbrook. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs and silk. A fireplace large enough to stand in crackled with warm flames. Windows looked out over the forest, and she could see the moon rising full and bright over the trees. "There's a bathing chamber through there." Theron indicated a door on the left. "Clothes in the wardrobes, they're probably not a perfect fit yet, but Alara will have new ones made to your measurements. Food if you're hungry. Anything you need, pull that cord, and someone will come." He was giving her space. She realized that with a jolt. After claiming her so publicly, so possessively, he was giving her room to breathe, to process, to adjust. "Thank you," Celine said softly. Then, because she needed to know, "Where will you be?" "My chambers are through there." He indicated a door she hadn't noticed on the far wall. "Connected, but you have privacy if you want it." And Celine, his storm-gray eyes met hers. "What happened tonight, the way he treated you, the way they all treated you, that's over. You're not that pack's discarded Omega anymore. You're my mate, my Luna, and I protect what's mine." The words should have sounded possessive. Instead, they sounded like a promise. After he left, Celine stood in the center of her new chambers and let it all crash over her. This morning, she'd woken up in a storage room, preparing for a mating ceremony with the beta who'd promised her forever. Tonight, she was standing in a Luna Queen's chambers in the most powerful fortress in the Northern Territories, wearing a ring that bound her to a king she'd met hours ago. Her life had completely shattered and reformed in the span of one night. She walked to the window and looked out at the moon. Somewhere out there, Demon and Kasha were probably celebrating their victory, congratulating themselves on making the smart political choice. Alpha Marcus was probably already calculating how to use his daughter's sudden rise to his advantage. And here she was, chosen by the one wolf none of them could have predicted. The mate bond hummed in her chest, warm and steady. A constant reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. She could feel Theron through it, could sense him in the adjoining chambers, giving her space but ready to come if she needed him. For the first time in her life, Celine allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Hope. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe the moon goddess broke her heart tonight to make room for something bigger. Tomorrow would bring challenges. A court full of wolves who'd question her worth, political complications she couldn't even imagine, and the enormous responsibility of learning to rule beside a king. But tonight, she was safe. She was chosen. And she was home. Celine touched the ring on her finger, feeling its warm pulse of power, and smiled through her tears. Let them underestimate her. Let them think she was just a broken Omega who got lucky. They were about to learn what happened when you underestimated a wolf who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Celine woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than anything she'd ever known, wearing silk nightclothes she didn't remember putting on. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the weight of the ring on her finger reminded her that last night had been terrifyingly real. She was Luna Queen, mate to the Alpha King, and she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. A soft knock at the door made her sit up quickly, pulling the furs around herself. "Come in," she called, her voice rough with sleep. Alara entered, followed by 3 younger women carrying trays of food and clothing. The older woman's expression was professionally neutral, but Celine could feel the assessment in her gaze, cataloging every flaw, every sign of inadequacy. "Good morning, Luna Queen," Alara said with a bow that was perfectly correct but somehow felt mocking. "I've brought breakfast and a selection of clothing for your first official day. The king has requested your presence at a council meeting in 2 hours. 2 hours. To transform from Selene the bastard daughter into someone who could sit beside the Alpha King and not embarrass him in front of his advisors. "Thank you," Selene managed, climbing out of bed with as much dignity as she could muster. The maids immediately surrounded her, and she realized with a jolt that they intended to dress her like a child. "I can dress myself," Selene said firmly. One of the younger maids, barely older than Selene herself, looked uncertain. "But my lady, it's tradition for the Luna to be attended." "I appreciate the tradition," Selene interrupted, trying to keep her voice kind but firm. "But I'm not comfortable with that yet. Please, just show me what I'm supposed to wear, and I'll manage." Alara's eyebrow raised fractionally. Judgment or approval? Selene couldn't tell. "As you wish, my lady. Though you should know that the Luna Queen's wardrobe is significantly more complex than what you're likely accustomed to." The barb landed exactly as intended. Selene's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. "Then I'll learn. I'm good at learning." What followed was a humiliating education in just how much she didn't know. The dress they'd selected was beautiful, deep midnight blue with silver embroidery, but it had more laces, clasps, and layers than seemed physically necessary. By the time Selene had fumbled her way into it, with the maids occasionally offering terse instructions, she felt like she'd run a marathon. Then came her hair. The maids took over that task, clearly not trusting her to achieve whatever elaborate style was expected of a Luna Queen. They pulled and pinned until her scalp ached, creating an elegant updo that made her look like a stranger in the mirror. "The king is waiting in the council chambers," Alara announced once Selene was finally deemed presentable. "I'll escort you." The walk through Midnight Keep's corridors was a special kind of torture. Wolves stopped and stared. Guards, servants, officials. All of them taking in the new Luna Queen with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Selene kept her spine straight and her chin up, but inside, her stomach churned with anxiety. The council chambers were massive, dominated by a long table of dark wood carved with scenes of wolves in battle. 12 chairs surrounded it, all occupied except for 2 at the head of the table. Theron sat in one, and the empty chair beside him, clearly meant for the Luna, waited like a throne and a trap in equal measure. Theron stood as she entered, and every other wolf at the table immediately followed suit. The show of respect should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt performative, required by protocol rather than genuine. "Counselors," Theron said, his voice carrying the absolute authority Selene was beginning to recognize as his default state. "My mate and your Luna Queen, Selene Blackwater." Blackwater, not Ashwood anymore. She'd taken his name the moment she accepted the ring. The reality of that hit her like a physical blow. She'd severed her last tie to her mother's line without even thinking about it. The counselors bowed, murmuring respectful greetings, but Selene could read the truth in their eyes. They didn't want her here. They were tolerating her presence because their king demanded it, but they had no intention of actually accepting her as their Luna. Theron pulled out her chair, and Selene sank into it gratefully. Up close, she could feel the mate bond humming between them, and she sensed his awareness of her anxiety. His hand briefly touched her shoulder, a small gesture of support that somehow made her feel fractionally less alone. "Now that our Luna has joined us," Theron began, settling back into his own chair, "we'll discuss the primary issue. The eastern border packs have been reporting increased rogue activity. Lord Garrett, your assessment." A grizzled older wolf with scars crisscrossing his face leaned forward. "The rogues are getting bolder, Your Majesty. They're no longer content with raiding supply caravans. Last week, they attacked a border patrol directly. We lost 3 wolves." The discussion continued, technical and complex, full of references to pack politics and territorial disputes that Selene struggled to follow. She tried to pay attention, to learn, but she was acutely aware of the sidelong glances from the counselors. They were waiting for her to reveal her ignorance, to prove she didn't belong here. "What about alliances?" another counselor asked. "If we could strengthen our ties with the Western packs through a mating alliance," a woman with sharp features interrupted. Lady Morgana, Selene would later learn, one of the oldest bloodlines in the Northern Territories. Before the king's unexpected claiming, we'd been discussing a potential bond with the Silverstream pack. Their alpha has a daughter who would have brought significant resources. That discussion is closed, Theron said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Permanently. Of course, Your Majesty, Morgana said smoothly. I simply meant to point out that alliances through mating bonds have always been a cornerstone of pack politics. Our new Luna, coming from such a small pack with limited connections, won't be able to provide the same strategic advantages. Enough! The word cracked through the chamber like a whip. Theron's eyes had gone full alpha, glowing with barely contained fury. If you have concerns about my mate's qualifications, address them to me directly, not through passive comments clearly designed to undermine her. Morgana bowed her head, but not before Celine caught the flash of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Proof that the new Luna was already causing division in the council. My apologies, Your Majesty, Morgana purred. I meant no disrespect. The meeting continued, but Celine barely heard it. She could feel Theron's anger through the bond, a simmering rage barely held in check. And she could feel something else too, his fear, not of the council but for her. He was worried about how she was handling this baptism by fire. When the meeting finally ended and the counselors filed out, Celine remained seated, staring at her hands. She'd said nothing for 2 hours. Not one word. She'd sat there like a decorative doll while they discussed matters of life and death, policy and politics. You handled that well, Theron said once they were alone. Celine's laugh was bitter. I didn't handle anything. I sat there in silence while they made it clear I'm inadequate. You didn't rise to their bait. That showed wisdom. Theron leaned back in his chair, studying her. They were testing you, Celine. Morgana in particular. She's been angling to have her daughter become my Luna for years. She's not going to accept you easily. She's right though, isn't she? Celine said quietly. I don't bring strategic advantages. I don't have connections or resources. I don't even understand half of what was discussed today. You will. Give yourself time to learn. Theron reached over and took her hand. I didn't expect you to walk in here and know everything. But Celine, you need to believe you have a right to be here. Because if you don't believe it, they never will. Before Celine could respond, the door burst open. A young guard, barely old enough to have finished his training, stood panting in the doorway. Your Majesty, he gasped. Visitors at the gate. From the Meadowbrook pack. They're demanding an audience. Celine's blood ran cold. Meadowbrook. Her old pack. What could they possibly want? Who? Theron's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. Alpha Marcus Ashwood and his daughter Lady Cassia. The guard swallowed hard. They say it's urgent. A matter of pack law and justice. Theron's hand tightened on Celine's. Through the bond, she felt his instant understanding. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was an attack. Show them to the receiving hall, Theron ordered. We'll meet them there in 10 minutes. After the guard left, Theron turned to Celine. You don't have to face them if you're not ready. I can handle this alone. No. Celine was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. I need to face them. Running away would just prove what they already believe, that I don't belong here. Something that might have been pride flickered in Theron's storm-gray eyes. Then we face them together. But Celine, don't let them make you feel small. You're not that pack's unwanted daughter anymore. You're a queen. The receiving hall was designed to intimidate, and it did its job well. Massive columns rose to a ceiling painted with scenes of ancient battles. Theron's throne, and yes, it was definitely a throne, sat on a raised dais at the far end. A smaller chair had been added beside it, clearly meant for Celine. They took their seats just as Marcus and Cassia were shown in. Celine's father looked older than she remembered, his face lined with stress. But Cassia looked furious. Her beautiful features were twisted with barely concealed rage, and the eyes that met Celine's burned with pure hatred. Both of them bowed, but the gesture felt perfunctory, insincere. Alpha King, Marcus began, his voice carefully controlled. Thank you for seeing us. We've come on a matter of urgent importance. Speak, Theron commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. Marcus glanced at Kasia, who stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice dripped with false concern. Your Majesty, we're worried about our sister. Celine has always been fragile, emotionally unstable. We fear that in her devastated state after Demon's rejection, she may have misrepresented what happened last night. Celine's hands clenched in her lap. They were going to claim she'd lied? That she'd manipulated the situation? Furthermore, Kasia continued, her voice gaining confidence, there's the matter of the law of claiming itself. Our pack's records show that Celine and Demon had entered into a pre-bond agreement 3 years ago, a formal promise witnessed by the pack, which means she wasn't actually rejected last night. Demon was simply choosing to end that agreement in favor of a better match. A better match, Theron repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Your words. A more suitable match, Marcus interjected quickly. Your Majesty, we mean no disrespect to Celine. But surely you can see that a mate bond with political advantages benefits the pack more than one based on childhood promises, Theron finished. Yes, I've heard this argument before. In fact, your daughter made it quite eloquently last night. He rose from his throne, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Celine had seen Theron angry before, but this was different. This was cold fury, controlled and infinitely more terrifying than any heated rage. Let me explain something about pack law, Theron said, descending from the dais with predatory grace. The law of claiming was created specifically to address situations where an Omega is wrongfully rejected or dishonored. A pre-bond agreement, no matter how formal, is not a completed mate bond, which means Demon Clearwater had every right to end it. But his voice cracked like a whip. He chose to do so publicly, in the most humiliating way possible, with no warning or private discussion. That constitutes wrongful rejection, which means my claim stands. But Your Majesty, Kasia started. I'm not finished. Theron's eyes flashed gold. You want to discuss pack law? Let's discuss it. You came here claiming to be concerned about your sister. But what you're really concerned about is that she's now in a position of power over you. That the bastard daughter you spent years tormenting is now your Luna Queen, and you're terrified of what that means. Kasia's face went pale. Celine felt a vicious satisfaction watching her sister squirm. We would never, Marcus began. Yes, you would. You have. Theron turned his attention to Celine's father. You allowed your legitimate daughter to abuse your illegitimate one for years. You gave Celine a storage room to live in while Kasia had a suite. You treated the daughter of a woman you once loved as an embarrassment to be hidden away. Marcus's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Celine had never seen her father at a loss for words before. And now you're here, Theron continued, trying to undermine my mate's position before she's had a chance to settle into it, trying to plant seeds of doubt about her mental state, her honesty, her worth. You're doing exactly what you've always done. Making Celine feel like she's the problem when the real problem has always been your failure as a father. The words hit like physical blows. Celine saw her father flinch, saw Kasia's face flush with humiliated rage. Get out, Theron said, his voice soft but absolute. And understand this. Celine is my mate and my queen. Any wolf who attempts to harm her, to undermine her, or to make her doubt her worth will answer to me personally. That includes her family, perhaps especially her family. Your Majesty, Marcus tried one more time. Out, out. Before I forget that you're technically my subject and therefore supposedly deserve basic respect. Though honestly, I'm struggling to remember why. Marcus and Kasia had no choice but to bow and retreat. But as she left, Kasia's eyes met Celine's one last time. The hatred there was pure and undiluted. And Celine knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. Her sister would find a way to strike back. Once they were gone, Celine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking in her lap. That was incredible, she whispered. Theron returned to the dais, but instead of taking his throne, He knelt in front of her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. They were trying to poison the well before you'd even had a chance to drink from it. They wanted you doubting yourself, questioning whether you deserved to be here. Maybe they're right, though, Celine said, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since the council meeting. Maybe I'm not. Don't. Theron's grip tightened. Don't let them put their inadequacy on you. Yes, you have things to learn. Yes, being Luna Queen is going to be hard. But you're already stronger than any of them realize, Celine. You survived 22 years in a pack that should have protected you but didn't. That takes a kind of strength that wolves like Kasha, who've never faced real adversity, can't even comprehend. I sat silent through the entire council meeting, Celine pointed out. I didn't contribute anything. I just existed. You observed. You learned. And you didn't let them provoke you into revealing your uncertainty. Theron's storm-gray eyes held hers. That's wisdom, Celine. Knowing when to speak and when to listen. Half the counselors in that room never learned that lesson. Celine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could become the Luna Queen he needed. But the doubts planted by years of being told she wasn't enough were deep roots, not easily pulled. I need to learn, she said finally. Everything. Politics, pack law, strategy, all of it. I can't just sit beside you looking decorative while important decisions are made. I need to actually understand what's happening. Something shifted in Theron's expression. Surprise melting into respect. Then you'll learn. I'll teach you myself if I have to, starting today. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and for the first time since arriving at Midnight Keep, Celine felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. She could do this. She could learn to be what he needed, what the kingdom needed. She just had to believe she deserved the chance. The next week passed in a blur of lessons and meetings and exhausting attempts to navigate the treacherous waters of pack politics. Theron kept his promise, spending hours teaching Celine about the territorial disputes, alliance structures, and intricate power balances that kept the northern territories functioning. She learned that being Luna Queen was less about giving orders and more about influence. Subtle pressure applied at the right moment, strategic alliances built through patience rather than force. She learned the names and histories of every major pack, which alphas could be trusted and which were waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. And she learned that the mate bond between her and Theron was growing stronger every day. She could feel him now even when they were in different parts of the keep. His presence a constant warmth in her chest. Sometimes she'd sense his frustration during a difficult meeting, or his satisfaction when a problem was resolved, and she knew he could feel her too, could sense when her anxiety spiked or when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like coming home. The court slowly, grudgingly, began to accept her. Not because they liked her, she had no illusions about that, but because Theron made it clear that disrespecting his Luna was a direct challenge to his authority. And no one wanted to challenge the Alpha King. Except, apparently, Lady Morgana. The attack came during a formal dinner 2 weeks after Celine's arrival. The Great Hall was filled with visiting Alphas and their families, all there to witness the newly mated Alpha King and his unexpected Luna Queen. Celine wore a gown of deep emerald that brought out the green flecks in her eyes, and she'd actually managed to contribute to the dinner conversation without embarrassing herself. She was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Then Morgana struck. "Luna Queen," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "I've been meaning to ask. We never did receive a proper announcement of your bloodline. It's tradition for a new Luna to present her lineage so the court can understand the strengths she brings to the position." The seemingly innocent question was a trap. Celine recognized it immediately. Morgana knew exactly what her bloodline was, or rather, what it wasn't. This was about humiliation, not information. Celine felt Theron tense beside her, felt his instinct to defend her rising. But she placed a hand on his arm, a silent message. "Let me handle this." "Of course, Lady Morgana," Celine said, keeping her voice pleasant. "My mother was Alara Ashwood, head healer of the Meadowbrook Pack. Her mother before her was also a healer, and her mother before that. In fact, The Ashwood line has provided healers to the Northern Territories for 6 generations. Ah yes, healers, Morgana said, her smile sharp. Quite valuable, I'm sure. Though, of course, healers are typically considered service positions rather than leadership ones. And your father? I understand he's Alpha Marcus, though the circumstances of your birth were irregular, the polite word for bastard. Celine's cheeks burned, but she refused to look away. Yes, my birth was outside of a formal mate bond, Celine said clearly. My mother and Alpha Marcus had a brief relationship that resulted in my conception. She raised me alone until she died when I was 12. How tragic, Morgana purred. And after her death, you lived in the pack house? In what capacity? In the capacity of an acknowledged daughter of the Alpha, Theron interjected, his voice cold as winter frost. Where is this line of questioning going, Morgana? I merely seek to understand our new Luna's background, Morgana said innocently. After all, traditionally, a Luna Queen comes from a strong bloodline with proven leadership qualities. She brings alliances, resources, connections. I'm simply trying to understand what unique qualifications Lady Celine, forgive me, Luna Celine, brings to the position, given her unusual background. The word unusual might as well have been inadequate. Every wolf in the hall understood the subtext. Celine felt the familiar shame trying to rise up, the voice that had whispered for years that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve to be here. But something else rose with it. Anger. She stood, and the hall went silent. Every eye turned to her. You want to know what I bring? Celine asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're right that I don't come from a powerful bloodline. I don't have political connections or vast wealth. What I do have is knowledge that has kept wolves alive for 6 generations. I know every healing herb in these territories and how to use them. I know how to set a bone, stitch a wound, brew a fever reducer, and identify poison by smell alone. She met Morgana's eyes directly, refusing to back down. I also know what it's like to be underestimated, to be dismissed because of circumstances of my birth that I had no control over, to have to work 3 times as hard as everyone else just to be considered half as good. That experience taught me things that wolves who've had everything handed to them could never understand. Morgana's smile had frozen on her face. So yes, my background is unusual, Celine continued. But I would argue that a Luna who understands what it's like to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, who knows how to survive with nothing, who can heal as well as hurt, that's actually quite valuable. Especially in uncertain times. She sat down, her heart hammering. The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, from the far end of the table, one of the visiting alphas began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. Not everyone, Morgana certainly didn't, but enough that Celine felt a rush of something that might have been triumph. Theron's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Through the bond, she felt his fierce pride, his satisfaction that she'd stood her ground. Well said, my Luna, he murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Then, addressing the table, anyone else have questions about my mate's qualifications? No one spoke. The message was clear. The Luna Queen had just proven she could defend herself. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Wolves who'd been dismissing Celine now regarded her with something closer to respect, or at least wariness. Either was better than contempt. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Celine had finally escaped the suffocating formality of court, she found herself in the one place that felt like sanctuary, the fortress gardens. They were smaller than she'd expected, tucked into a courtyard protected from the harsh northern winds, but they were beautiful. Someone, probably Theron's mother or grandmother, had cultivated medicinal herbs alongside decorative flowers. Celine knelt beside a patch of foxglove, examining the leaves in the moonlight. This plant could heal or kill depending on dosage and preparation. Just like words, she supposed, just like power. You handled yourself well tonight, a voice said from the shadows. Celine jerked to her feet, her heart racing, but it was only Garrett, the scarred counselor from her first meeting. He stepped into the moonlight, his weathered face unreadable. "Thank you," Celine managed, trying to calm her pounding heart. "Morgana's been circling like a vulture for weeks," Garrett continued, moving to stand beside her but keeping a respectful distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You disarmed her beautifully. I just told the truth." "Yes, and that was exactly the right move." Garrett was quiet for a moment, studying the garden. The previous Luna, King Theron's mother, she cultivated this garden. She said that understanding how to heal was just as important as understanding how to fight. Most of the court thought she was soft. They were wrong. Celine heard the subtext. "You're saying I remind you of her. I'm saying you have strengths that wolves like Morgana can't see because they've never had to develop them themselves." Garrett turned to face her. "But I'll be honest with you, Luna. The court is divided. Some see you as an asset, a mate who strengthens the king rather than just bringing political advantage. Others see you as a weakness to be exploited. Which are you?" Celine asked directly. Garrett's scarred face creased into what might have been a smile. "I'm a wolf who's lived long enough to recognize strength when I see it, regardless of where it comes from. You stood up to Morgana tonight without your mate's protection. That took courage. Keep showing that courage, and you'll win over more of the doubters." He bowed. A real bow, not the perfunctory gesture she'd gotten used to, and left Celine alone with the herbs and her thoughts. She should have felt triumphant. She'd survived Morgana's attack, earned Garrett's respect, proven she could defend herself. But instead, she felt exhausted. Every day was a battle, every conversation a test. How long could she keep this up before the pressure crushed her? "You're thinking too loud." Theron's voice came from behind her. "I can feel your anxiety through the bond from 3 floors up." Celine turned to find him leaning against the garden entrance, still in his formal clothes but with his jacket removed and his shirt partially unlaced. Even disheveled, he looked like a king. Meanwhile, she felt like a child playing dress-up. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked. "The constant scrutiny, the politics, the feeling like one wrong word could undo everything?" "No," Theron said honestly, moving to join her among the herbs. "It doesn't get easier. You just get stronger, better at reading the currents, anticipating the attacks. But the pressure? That's constant. It's the price of power." "I'm not sure I want power." "What do you want, Celine?" The question stopped her. What did she want? Not to go back to Meadowbrook, certainly. Not to be that scared, invisible girl living in a storage room. But this constant performance, this endless proving of her worth? "I want to belong," she said finally. "Really belong, not just be tolerated because I'm mated to you. I want to do something that matters, that makes a real difference. And I want—" She hesitated. "I want us to be real." "We are real," Theron said, confused. "No, I mean yes, the mate bond is real. But we barely know each other, Theron. We were strangers 2 weeks ago. Now we're supposed to rule a kingdom together? It feels like we're acting in a play we didn't get to rehearse." Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Celine said. "Your favorite food. What you were like as a child. Why you became Alpha King at such a young age. Garrett mentioned your mother, but what happened to your father? What makes you laugh? What keeps you up at night? I want to know the wolf, not just the king." "That might take a while," Theron warned, but there was warmth in his voice. "We have time." So they sat among the healing herbs under the stars, and Theron talked. He told her about his childhood, about a father who ruled with an iron fist and a mother who tempered that strength with compassion. He told her about the rebellion that killed his father when Theron was just 20, about having to step into leadership before he was ready, about spending 10 years learning to be the king his father never was. He told her about his fears, that he was too cold, too harsh, that he ruled through fear rather than respect. He told her about the loneliness of command, of making decisions that would save some wolves and doom others, of carrying the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders with no one to share the burden. "Until you," he said quietly. Until I saw you crying in that clearing and my wolf woke up for the first time in a decade. You weren't supposed to be there, you know. I was cutting through Meadowbrook territory on my way back from a border dispute. If I'd taken the main road like I planned, I never would have seen you. Fate, Celine murmured. Or the moon goddess. Theron reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending familiar electricity racing down her spine. Either way, I'm grateful, even if it complicates everything. I'm grateful too, Celine admitted, even though I'm terrified most of the time. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Theron's hand cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. But Celine, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win over every member of the court or handle every challenge alone. We're partners. That means we face the hard things together. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, with truth. Celine leaned into his touch, letting herself take comfort from his strength. Tell me something, Theron said. Something you've never told anyone. Celine considered. There were so many secrets, so many hurts she'd buried. But one rose to the surface. I blamed myself for my mother's death for years, she confessed. She got sick while she was weaving my ceremony dress. The illness took her fast, and I thought if she hadn't been spending her energy on making me something beautiful, maybe she would have had the strength to fight it. Maybe she'd still be alive. That's not how illness works, Theron said gently. You know that, as a healer's daughter. I know, but grief isn't logical. Celine's throat tightened. And the worst part is that after she died, no one in the pack really cared. She was just the Alpha's former mistress, the healer who'd outlived her usefulness. They gave her a basic funeral and moved on. Like she didn't matter. She mattered, Theron said fiercely. She mattered because she gave you life and taught you strength and created something beautiful even while she was dying. That's legacy, Celine. That's immortality. The tears came then, hot and unbidden. Celine hadn't cried over her mother in years. She'd learned to push the grief down, to function despite it. But Theron's words cracked something open inside her, and the grief poured out. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. He didn't try to stop her tears or tell her everything was fine. He just held her, solid and steady, while she finally mourned properly. When the storm passed, Celine found herself exhausted but somehow lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't even known about and had finally set it down. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For letting me be weak. Everyone else needs me to be strong all the time. Perfect. It's exhausting. You're allowed to be human, Celine. Or wolf, I suppose. She felt his smile against her hair. Being Luna Queen doesn't mean you can't have moments of vulnerability. It just means you get to choose who sees them. They stayed in the garden until the moon set, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since arriving at Midnight Keep, Celine felt like maybe she could actually do this. Not because she was perfect or qualified, but because she had someone who would catch her when she fell. The peace lasted exactly 3 more days. The attack came at dawn. Celine woke to the sound of screams and the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, her heart racing, every instinct screaming danger. Theron was already moving, pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency. Stay here, he commanded, his voice sharp with authority. Lock the doors behind me. Don't open them for anyone but me. What's happening? Rogues. Inside the keep. His eyes met hers, glowing gold with his wolf. They somehow got past our defenses. This shouldn't be possible. He was gone before Celine could respond, the door slamming behind him. She heard the click of the lock and then nothing. Just the distant sounds of battle, snarls, screams, the clash of steel on steel. Celine paced her chambers like a caged animal. Every instinct told her to shift, to fight, to do something. But she was a healer, not a warrior. What could she possibly do? Then she smelled it. Blood. Fresh blood, and a lot of it. Someone pounded on the door to the corridor. Not Theron's private entrance, but the main door. Luna. Luna Queen, please. We need help. Celine rushed to the door but didn't open it. Who is it? Garrett, Luna. We have wounded. Too many for the healers to handle alone. We need every trained hand we can get. Theron had told her to stay locked in her chambers. But wolves were dying. And she was a healer's daughter. She couldn't hide while people bled out. Celine threw open the door. Garrett stood there, blood spattering his armor, his face grim. The infirmary. Now, can you handle seeing combat wounds? I've been training for this my whole life, Celine said, already moving. Lead the way. The infirmary was chaos. Wounded wolves lay on every available surface, blood pooling on the stone floors. The head healer, a stern older woman named Mira, was barking orders at overwhelmed assistants. Her eyes widened when she saw Celine. Luna Queen, you shouldn't. I'm a healer's daughter, Celine interrupted. Alara Ashwood's daughter. I can help. Tell me where I'm needed most. Something shifted in Myra's expression. Respect replacing surprise. Critical wounds in the back room. If you can stabilize them until I can get there. Celine was already moving. The back room was worse than the main infirmary. 3 wolves lay dying. One with a gash across his chest that exposed bone. One with a crushed arm. One with claw marks that had barely missed her jugular. Celine's training kicked in. She saw what needed to be done with crystalline clarity. The chest wound first, it was bleeding too fast. She grabbed supplies with practiced efficiency. Her hands steady despite the horror around her. You're going to be fine, she told the young guard as she packed the wound. I need you to stay with me. Talk to me. What's your name? Jason, he gasped. Luna. Yes, and I promise you, Jason, I'm not letting you die. She worked as she talked, her hands moving through the familiar motions her mother had taught her. Clean the wound, pack it to stop the bleeding, prepare a needle and thread for stitching. Where are you from? B. Border Pack. Joined the King's Guard last year. His voice was getting weaker. Well, you're going to serve many more years, Celine said firmly, beginning to stitch. Her mother had always said a healer's confidence could be as important as her skill. If the patient believed they'd survive, they fought harder to stay alive. This is going to hurt, but I need you to hold still. Can you do that for me? He nodded, gritting his teeth as she worked. The wound was deep, the stitching intricate, but Celine's hands never wavered. She'd done this hundreds of times under her mother's supervision, practicing on leather and pig flesh until the movements were muscle memory. When Jason was stable, she moved to the next patient, then the next. Time became meaningless. There was only blood and pain and the desperate fight to keep hearts beating. She lost track of how many wolves she treated, how many times she heard, "Thank you, Luna," in trembling voices. At some point, Mira appeared at her elbow. Luna, you need to rest. You've been at this for 4 hours. For hours? Felt like minutes. Celine looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her silk nightgown, which she'd never changed out of, was ruined with gore and medicinal stains. The wounded are stable thanks to you. We only lost 2 wolves total, and neither of them were ones you treated. Myra's voice held genuine respect. Your mother taught you well. Celine nodded numbly, exhaustion suddenly crashing over her like a wave. Now that the adrenaline was fading, she could barely stand. Luna! Theron's voice cut through the fog. He stood in the doorway, streaked with blood and soot, his eyes wild with fear. When they landed on her, covered in blood, his face went white. Are you hurt? Did they? It's not my blood, Celine assured him quickly. I was helping. The wounded needed. She didn't get to finish the sentence. Theron crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I told you to stay in your chambers, he said, his voice rough. I told you to stay safe. I felt your fear through the bond and I couldn't get to you. I thought. His arms tightened. I thought I'd lost you. Wolves were dying, Celine said simply. I'm a healer. I couldn't hide while people needed help. Theron pulled back enough to look at her face. His storm gray eyes were fierce with emotion. Fear, pride, anger, love all swirling together. You were incredible. Mira told me what you did. Jason, the young guard, he told everyone that the Luna Queen saved his life with her own hands. That she talked to him the whole time, kept him from giving up. I did what any healer would do. No, Theron said firmly. You did what a true Luna does. You put your people's needs before your own safety. You proved that your value isn't in political connections or powerful bloodlines. It's in your skills, your courage, your compassion. He kissed her then, desperately, in front of everyone in the infirmary. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was raw and claiming and full of the fear he'd felt thinking she might be hurt. When they finally broke apart, Celine was breathless. You're going to ruin my reputation, she murmured. Queens are supposed to be dignified. Queens are supposed to be strong. You proved that today. Theron's voice dropped lower. But if anyone ever attacks this keep again, and you even think about leaving your chambers, you'll what? Lock me in? I'm your partner, remember? You're equal. That means I get to make my own decisions about risk. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. I'm going to have my hands full with you, aren't I? Absolutely. The word spread through Midnight Keep like wildfire. The Luna Queen, still in her nightgown, had spent 4 hours in the infirmary saving lives. The Luna Queen, who some had dismissed as inadequate, had healer's hands and a warrior's heart. By the time Celine cleaned up and changed clothes, the story had already grown into legend. According to the increasingly elaborate versions, she'd single-handedly saved dozens of wolves, performing miraculous healings that even the head healer couldn't match. They're exaggerating, Celine told Theron that evening as they sat in his private chambers. Their chambers now, as she'd unofficially moved in after the attack. Maybe, but legends are powerful, Celine. You gave the court something today they didn't expect. Proof that you belong here not because of the mate bond, but because of who you are. Your own merit. What about the attack? Celine asked. Garrett said the rogues got past our defenses. How is that possible? Theron's expression darkened. Someone helped them. Someone inside the keep gave them information about patrol schedules and weak points in our defenses. We're still investigating, but... He hesitated. Celine, I need to tell you something. Some of the rogues we captured, they were paid. They had orders to target specific wolves. I slid down Celine's spine. Who? You. Theron's voice was flat, controlled, but she could feel his rage through the bond. They had orders to take you alive if possible, kill you if not. Someone wants you removed from the position of Luna Queen. Morgana, Celine said immediately. Probably, but we need proof. Theron took her hands. Until we know who's behind this, you're not safe. I'm assigning you permanent guards, and you don't go anywhere in the keep without escort. That's not how partners work, Celine protested. You can't just decide. This isn't about control. It's about keeping you alive. Theron's eyes glowed with barely contained fury. Someone tried to kill my mate today. They failed, but they'll try again. I can't. I won't lose you. The raw emotion in his voice stopped her protest. Through the bond, she felt the depth of his fear, his absolute terror at the thought of losing her. It wasn't about control. It was about a male wolf's primal need to protect his mate. Okay, she said softly. Guards. But Theron, whoever is behind this, whoever tried to kill me, they failed. And they showed their hand too early. Now we know there's a threat, and we can prepare. You sound like a strategist. I've been paying attention in council meetings. Celine managed a smile. Turns out I'm learning. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of increased security, constant vigilance, and careful interrogation of the captured rogues. And finally, they had their proof. The traitor wasn't Morgana. It was worse. Kasha had somehow infiltrated Midnight Keep, using her connections as the Alpha's daughter to gain access to servants and guards. She'd paid rogues, bribed staff, and coordinated an attack designed to look like a random raid while specifically targeting Celine. She wanted me dead, Celine said numbly, staring at the evidence Garrett had compiled. My own sister wanted me dead. She wanted your position, Theron corrected. And she was willing to murder you to get it. The question now is what we do about it. By law, attempting to kill the Luna Queen was treason punishable by death. But Kasha was still Celine's sister, still family, however twisted that relationship had become. I want to talk to her, Celine said, before any sentence is carried out. I need to understand why. Theron looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded. One conversation. In the dungeons with guards present. And Celine, be careful. She's already proven she's willing to hurt you. The dungeons of Midnight Keep were cold, dark, and utterly unforgiving. Kasha sat in a cell, her once beautiful gown filthy and torn, her golden hair tangled. But her eyes still burned with hatred. Come to gloat, Kasha spat when she saw Celine. Come to watch me suffer while you play queen? I came to understand, Celine said quietly. Why, Kasha? What did I ever do to you? What did you do? Kasha laughed, a bitter sound. You existed. You were father's mistake, his shame, walking proof that even alphas can be weak. But instead of just being grateful for whatever scraps we threw you, you had to go and become Luna Queen. You took what should have been mine. I never wanted to take anything from you, Celine said. I just wanted to be loved, to belong. And now you do, Kasha sneered, while I rot in a cell. It's not fair. You don't deserve this. You're nothing. No, Celine interrupted, her voice firm. I'm not nothing. I never was. You convinced yourself I was less than you because of how I was born, but that was always your limitation, not mine. I survived everything you and father and the entire pack threw at me. I became strong in ways you'll never understand because you've never had to struggle for anything. You think you're so special now. I think I'm done letting you make me feel small. Celine looked at her sister, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside. The last threads of the bond that had tied her to her old life, to the scared girl who'd lived in a storage room and believed she was worthless, finally snapped. I forgive you, Kasha, not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying the weight of your hatred. She turned to leave, but Kasha's voice followed her. They'll never truly accept you. You'll always be the bastard who got lucky. The king's charity case. Celine paused at the door. Maybe. But I'd rather be a bastard who earned her place through courage and compassion than a legitimate daughter who squandered every advantage through cruelty and spite. Goodbye, Kasha. She walked out of the dungeon and didn't look back. Theron was waiting for her in the corridor. How do you feel? Free, Celine said, surprising herself. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Kasha was exiled rather than executed, Celine's mercy, against the advice of the council. She was stripped of her title, her family name, and sent to the harshest territory in the north where she could cause no more harm. Alpha Marcus, who'd known about his daughter's plans but done nothing to stop them, was removed from his position. The Meadowbrook pack was absorbed into direct royal control. And Celine? Celine finally, truly became Luna Queen. 6 months after the attack, she stood before the assembled court, not as Theron's uncertain mate, but as a leader in her own right. She'd created new healing protocols that had already saved dozens of lives. She'd negotiated a trade agreement with a neighboring territory. She'd earned the respect of even the most skeptical counselors through patience, intelligence, and unshakable integrity. You've changed the kingdom, Theron told her one night as they sat together in their chambers. You've made it stronger, better, more compassionate. We've changed it, Celine corrected. Together, like partners. Like mates, Theron agreed, pulling her close. The bond between them had deepened into something unbreakable. Not just attraction or duty, but genuine partnership. They balanced each other, complemented each other, made each other better. Do you ever regret it? Celine asked. Claiming me that night? You could have chosen someone with connections, someone who would have made your life easier. Not for a single moment. Theron's storm-gray eyes met hers, fierce with certainty. You were never easy, Celine. You were necessary. You were destiny. And you are, without question, the best decision I ever made. Celine kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it: gratitude, love, belonging. She'd come to Midnight Keep as a broken Omega who'd been publicly rejected. She'd become a queen in every sense of the word. The rejected girl had found her throne. The abandoned Omega had found her home. And the wolf everyone underestimated had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from bloodlines or connections, but from surviving impossible odds with grace and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. Celine Blackwater, Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, looked out at her kingdom and smiled. She'd finally found where she belonged.